My name is Sarah Whitman. I'm 32 years old, and I live just outside Denver, Colorado. 3 years ago, I married into a family that smiled at me in photos and rolled their eyes the moment the camera turned away. If you had told me back then that the same people who called me the help at their own dinner party were living in a house I secretly owned, I would have laughed and told you that's impossible. Nobody's life works out that perfectly. But it's exactly what happened. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why I never raised my voice once. I didn't need to. This is the story of how silence became my greatest weapon. It started 3 years earlier when I met Michael Whitman at a friend's engagement party. He was warm, funny, the kind of man who remembered small details about your day. We fell in love fast, the way people do when everything feels easy. Michael's family seemed close-knit at first. His mother, Diane, hosted big Sunday dinners. His father, Robert, told long stories about the family business. I wanted so badly to belong to something like that. I'd grown up with just my grandmother, who raised me after my parents passed when I was young. Family to me was something precious, something I'd never really had enough of. So when Michael proposed, I said yes without a single doubt. I thought I was gaining a family. I had no idea what I was actually walking into. The first red flag was small. At our engagement dinner, Diane introduced me to her friends as Michael's little project. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when you're trying to fit in. Then came the comments about my job. I worked in property finance, quiet, behind-the-scenes work, structuring loans and investments for a small firm. Robert would ask, in front of guests, "So you're still doing that paperwork thing?" As if my career was something to apologize for. I told myself it didn't matter. Michael loved me. That was enough. There was another moment, too, smaller, easy to overlook at the time. At a family barbecue, Diane introduced her neighbor's daughter, a young woman studying law, by listing her achievements one by one, practically glowing with pride. When she got to me, she simply said, "And this is Sarah. She's with Michael." No job, no name recognition, just an attachment to someone else's identity. I remember standing there, drink in hand, waiting for her to say something else. She didn't. She just moved on to the next guest, like I'd already finished being interesting. But that's the thing about red flags. You don't see the pattern until you're standing in the middle of it. After the wedding, things shifted. Diane began dropping by our home unannounced, rearranging our kitchen, telling me my decorating choices were a little basic. Robert made jokes at family dinners about how Michael had married beneath the family name. I brought it up to Michael more than once. He'd sigh and say, "That's just how they are. Don't take it personally." But it kept happening. At Thanksgiving, Diane seated me at the far end of the table, near the kitchen door, while she introduced her sister-in-law's daughter as the real addition to this family. I wish I noticed the pattern earlier. I wish I hadn't kept excusing it as just their personality, because the worst moment was still ahead of me, and it happened in front of 40 of their closest friends. It was Robert and Diane's 35th wedding anniversary party. A beautiful home, string lights across the backyard, catering trucks parked outside. I had spent the whole week helping plan the flowers and the seating chart, staying up late finalizing details because Diane said she was too overwhelmed to do it herself. The night of the party, I was refilling a drink station near the kitchen when one of Diane's friends turned to me and asked, "Oh, are you with the catering company?" Before I could answer, Diane laughed loudly and said, No, that's just the help. She's married to my son." The whole group laughed along with her. I felt my face go hot. I set the pitcher down carefully because my hands were shaking, and I walked to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub and cried quietly, the way you cry when you don't want anyone to hear you. That's when everything changed. Not because of anger, because of clarity. Here is what Diane and Robert didn't know that night. 18 months earlier, their family's beautiful house, the one where the party was happening, had fallen behind on payments after Robert's business took a hit during a rough financial year. Robert, too proud to ask his own son for help, had quietly refinanced the mortgage through a private investment firm to avoid the embarrassment of a bank rejection showing up on his credit report. That firm outsourced the loan servicing to smaller finance partners. One of those partners was the company I worked for, and the loan officer who structured and approved that exact refinancing was me. I had known for months. I never said a word to Michael or to them. I told myself it wasn't my business to bring up. I thought maybe, Someday, it just wouldn't matter. But standing in that bathroom, listening to muffled laughter through the door, I realized something. It mattered now. I want to be clear about something. This was never about revenge in the way people imagine. Oh, no shouting, no dramatic scene, no public shaming. I'm not built that way. What I wanted was something quieter. I wanted the truth to simply exist in the open and let them sit with it. I dried my eyes, fixed my makeup, and walked back out to the party like nothing happened. I smiled. I even refilled that same drink station. But that night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide what I did for a living anymore. I wasn't going to shrink myself to make Robert and Diane comfortable. And I certainly wasn't going to let them humiliate me again without consequence. The next morning, I pulled the loan file. I reviewed every detail AO, the payment schedule, the renewal terms coming up in 90 days, the exact language in the servicing agreement, and I began preparing something Diane and Robert never saw coming. Over the following weeks, I said nothing to Michael. This wasn't about turning him against his parents, AU. It was about making sure the truth came out in a way that couldn't be twisted, denied, or laughed off. I scheduled a routine loan review meeting AO, something that happens naturally every few years for accounts like theirs. I made sure it would be handled properly, professionally, on the record, with documentation Robert himself would have to sign. I also quietly gathered every text message, every comment, every moment where Diane or Robert had made me feel small, not for revenge, but because I wanted to remember, clearly, why I deserved to stop apologizing for myself. Michael noticed I seemed different, calmer, somehow. He asked if everything was okay. I told him, everything's about to be very okay. He didn't understand yet. He would soon. The 90-day renewal meeting arrived. Robert assumed it would be handled the way it always was, a phone call, a signature, quiet and invisible. Instead, my firm sent standard renewal paperwork requiring an in-person review, as company policy dictated for loans of that size. Robert walked into that meeting expecting to sit across from a stranger. Instead, he sat across from me. I watched the color drain from his face as he realized the woman he'd spent 3 years calling the help was the same person holding the terms of the mortgage on the house he lived in, the house where he'd humiliated me in front of 40 guests. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't bring up the anniversary party. I simply reviewed the paperwork professionally, the way I would with any client, and said, "Everything looks in order, Robert. Let's go through the renewal terms together." He signed the papers with a shaking hand. For the first time in 3 years, he had absolutely nothing clever to say. Word travels fast in families like this. By the time Diane found out, whispered secondhand through Robert, something had shifted permanently in how they saw me. The jokes stopped. The little comments about my paperwork job disappeared completely. Diane called me a week later, her voice unusually careful, almost gentle. She said she hadn't realized how successful I'd become. I simply said, "You never asked." Michael, once he learned the full story, was stunned, not angry with me for staying quiet, but ashamed of how his parents had treated me for years without him fully seeing it. He apologized more sincerely than he ever had before, and for the first time, he stood firmly on my side at every family gathering that followed. What surprised me most wasn't Michael's reaction, or even Robert's. It was my own grandmother's voice in my head, something she used to tell me when I was a girl. You don't have to shout to be heard, you just have to be undeniable. I hadn't understood what she meant until that meeting, sitting across from Robert with a folder of paperwork between us, saying nothing that wasn't already true. The following Christmas, Diane asked me, for the first time in 3 years, what my work actually involved. Not as a joke this time. She listened. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was small, quiet, and honestly, that felt more real than anything dramatic could have. Robert and Diane never publicly apologized for the anniversary party comment, but they never disrespected me again either. Sometimes, the loudest justice is the kind that never needs to be announced. Looking back now, I don't feel triumphant about what happened. I feel something quieter than that, a kind of peace. I learned that you don't always need to defend yourself loudly to be respected. Sometimes the truth, presented calmly and clearly, does more work than any argument ever could. I also learned that the people who make you feel small are often the ones most afraid of being seen clearly themselves. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong at your own table, I hope this story reminds you of something important. Your worth was never up for debate. It was simply waiting for the right moment to be undeniable. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.